That single question has haunted me for centuries. It echoes in the hollow corridors of my mind like a curse I cannot silence. In the Imperium, there are questions one does not ask, truths one does not seek. Yet, it was this forbidden thought that led me down a path from which there is no return. For as long as I can remember, the image of the Emperor has been that of salvation, golden, radiant, and unyielding. Billions worship his light as though it is eternal. They kneel before his divine effigy, whispering prayers to a God who never answers, clinging to the illusion that he still watches over them. But I have seen something different. I have seen the darkness behind that light. They call me Inquisitor Veronial, once a servant of the Ordo Hereticus, now a fugitive, hunted by the very faith I once defended. My crime was not heresy. My crime was curiosity. Curiosity in a galaxy where curiosity is death. It began within the archives of Terra, deep beneath the catacombs of the Imperial Palace, where silence itself feels alive. I was searching for lost accounts of the Unification Wars, the days before the Emperor's ascension, when I stumbled upon a file sealed by the Sigillite himself. The seal bore a warning. To open this is to see the Emperor as he truly is. Most would have recoiled in fear. I could not. I broke the seal. The first words in that document changed everything I believed. It spoke not of a God born from light, but of a man forged from shadow, a being who ascended not through purity, but through sacrifice and deceit. It described the Emperor not as the savior of mankind, but as its ultimate manipulator. From that moment, the walls of faith began to crumble around me. The more I read, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to align. The Emperor's immortality, his silence, the mysterious nature of the Golden Throne, it all began to make sense. The so-called divine light that sustains him might not be divine at all. It might be something far older, darker, and more parasitic than the ecclesiarchy dares to imagine. I was not the first to question this truth. In the margins of that ancient text were scrawled the notes of another soul, an archivist who had tried to piece together the Emperor's origins. His words trembled with fear. He is not one soul, but many. He is not man, but the sum of mankind's sins. What did he mean by that? The next weeks blurred into obsession. Every forbidden codex, every erased record I uncovered painted a clearer, more terrifying picture. The Emperor was not a god who sacrificed for humanity, he was humanity's sacrifice. He was the product of a ritual, a convergence of countless psychers from the dawn of our species, bound into one immortal will. A god not born from light, but from death. And if that was true, then what remains of him now, after 10,000 years upon the Golden Throne? Every whisper I chased led to one dreadful conclusion. The Emperor's true form is not the radiant being the faithful imagine, but a decaying god machine, feeding on the souls of those who pray to him, consuming their faith to sustain his dying will. And still, I am not certain what terrifies me more, the possibility that he is dead, or the possibility that he still lives. Because if he lives, then perhaps he hears these words. Perhaps he watches me even now, through the eyes of a million servitors, through the minds of every believer who dares to hope. And perhaps, he remembers what I've learned. Not a single syllable, not a fragment of what he was called before the Imperium. The greatest figure in human history, and yet, not even his birth is remembered. That's not an accident, it's by design, because his name was never his own. The ancient texts I uncovered spoke of a time before the rise of the Imperium, before even the age of strife, a time when humanity was still fractured, scattered across the ancient earth, torn apart by war, famine, and madness. It was an age when psychic power first began to awaken within man, uncontrolled and wild. And with that awakening came the first whispers of the warp, voices that promised power, knowledge, and damnation. The shamans of old, the first human psychers, saw what was coming. They foresaw a future where mankind would be devoured by the very forces it had just begun to touch. And so, they made a choice that would forever change the fate of the species. They gathered in secret, 10,000 of them, perhaps more, the wisest, oldest, and most powerful psychers alive. They met in silence beneath the dying sky, in the deserts of ancient Anatolia, as the world burned around them. And there, they performed a ritual no sane being would ever attempt again. Each shaman took his own life. Every one of them died willingly, their souls cast into the warp in one synchronized act of sacrifice. But rather than being devoured by the chaos gods, something else happened. Their spirits fused together, not destroyed, not consumed, but merged. Thousands of Psyker souls becoming one, and from that storm of agony and unity, he was born. Not as a god, not yet. As a child, a human boy with no parents, no past, and no name, carrying within him the collective memory of 10,000 dead souls. He was born into a world that could not possibly understand what he was. Imagine that. A single being carrying all the knowledge, power, and madness of humanity's first Psykers. A child who could see every possible future, hear every thought, feel every heartbeat. To survive such awareness would break any mind. But he endured. Over centuries, he watched humanity rise and fall, kingdoms burn and rebuild, names change, empires vanish. He moved among them unseen, sometimes a leader, sometimes a philosopher, sometimes nothing more than a shadow behind history. Every myth of a divine guide, every legend of a golden man whispering wisdom to kings, they were all fragments of him. He became the thread that stitched history together. The unseen architect of civilization. The manipulator of destiny. But power like that doesn't come without cost. The more he used it, the more it consumed him. Because every act of guidance, every moment of control over fate, pulled him closer to the warp. It whispered to him, tempting him to rule, to conquer, to be more than man. And perhaps that was the first time he lied, not to others, but to himself. He believed he could master the warp without becoming part of it. He believed he could harness chaos without ever being tainted by it. But even gods can be deceived. The texts described how he began creating vessels, avatars, experiments, fragments of his own will-given form. Some of them were beautiful, radiant beings of light and order. Others were twisted abominations, failed echoes of his perfection. Each one was an attempt to divide his burden, to make his existence tolerable. But every failure left a mark upon him. Every fragment he cast away became a scar on his soul. And when he finally united humanity under his banner, when he rose as the emperor of mankind, he was already something far removed from human. He had seen too much, lived too long, felt too deeply. The man who once sought to protect humanity now saw it as clay to be molded. Tools, pawns, flesh to be shaped in his vision of perfection. The emperor's divinity was not born of love, but of control. And yet, there was still one truth deeper than all others, one secret so profound that even the Inquisition dares not whisper it. Because the ritual that created him never ended. The souls that merged to form him still exist within him, bound, trapped, screaming across eternity. And sometimes, when the veil between the warp and reality thins, they whisper. They whisper the true name of the Emperor. The name he buried, the name that could unmake everything. But that is a truth for the next chapter. The Golden Throne is not a throne. It is a machine, a prison, a life support system designed not to honor the Emperor, but to contain him. For 10,000 years, he has not ruled. He has endured. His flesh, once radiant, has decayed into something unrecognizable. His bones are fused with metal conduits. His veins replaced by cables that pulse with psychic energy instead of blood. His eyes, if they still exist, are buried beneath a mass of circuitry that glows with stolen light. And yet, he still thinks. He still dreams. At least, that's what the High Lords claim. But the ancient records I found suggest something else entirely. Something the ecclesiarchy will never allow to be spoken aloud. The Emperor's consciousness, his very mind, is fractured. The ritual that birthed him was never meant to last forever. The souls that became him are splintering, decaying under the endless pressure of the warp. Imagine a god whose thoughts are no longer his own. A being of 1,000 voices screaming at once, each one a memory of a human life long lost. That is what he has become, a chorus of madness. A divine machine haunted by its creators. The psychers who serve as offerings, the countless thousands sacrificed every day to keep the Astronomicon burning, they do more than sustain his life. Their deaths feed the machine with psychic energy, yes, but their minds also join him. Every one of them becomes part of his eternal torment. He is not alone upon the throne. He never was. He is surrounded by the ghosts of those who die for him, their souls chained to his will, their essence devoured into his endless hunger for survival. The Emperor does not simply consume faith, he consumes lives. And that light you see in the night sky, the beacon that guides every Imperial ship across the stars. That's not his light, that's the collective agony of millions of dying minds, burning eternally to keep a corpse god breathing. But even that is beginning to fail. The Adeptus Mechanicus whisper of power fluctuations, of screams echoing through the conduits of the throne. Some claim to have seen movement, the twitch of a hand, a tremor in the air, the faint sound of breathing deep beneath the machine. Others speak of something far worse, that the Emperor is trying to awaken. If he wakes, the galaxy will not be saved. It will be consumed, because the being that rises from that throne will not be the Emperor humanity remembers. It will be something new, something built from 10,000 years of pain, sacrifice, and divine hunger. A creature made of both man and God, light and shadow. In the moment he opens his eyes, the Astronomicon will go dark. Every ship in the Imperium will lose its way. Every psyker will hear his voice. And all of humanity will know, in a single instant, the truth of what they have been worshipping. That moment will be the day faith dies. The priests of the ecclesiarchy will tell you they are blessed, touched by his will, chosen to spread his light. But deep within the forbidden vaults of Mars and Terra, I discovered another truth. Those who hear him don't live long enough to speak of it. The Adeptus Mechanicus has been trying to communicate with the Emperor for centuries. They call it the Resonance Project. Officially, it does not exist. Unofficially, it has consumed more lives than any war since the Horus Heresy. The Mechanicus believes that the Emperor's psychic frequency, the energy that fuels the Astronomicon, carries fragments of thought. Echoes of consciousness buried within the light. They have built machines to translate these echoes, vast constructs of iron and psionic resonance, each one the size of a cathedral. Their goal is simple, to make the Emperor speak again. But what they found was not the voice of a god. It was the whisper of something else. One report, smuggled from the data vaults of Mars and marked excommunicate extremis, described the event as the sound of a mind unmaking itself. When the first resonance machine was activated, every psyker in a 100-kilometer radius screamed in unison, their bodies convulsing, their eyes bursting into flame. For 3 full minutes, the machine translated the Emperor's voice into a single word, hunger. After that, silence. The machine was sealed. The adepts who built it were executed. The experiment was erased from all records. But it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The Mechanicus tried again. New machines, new theories, new sacrifices. Each attempt yielded the same result: chaos, death, and one word. Sometimes, hunger. Sometimes, pain. Once, remember. The Emperor is trying to speak. But the message is not divine. It's desperate. The priests say he is guiding humanity. The truth is, he is calling for help. Or perhaps, for release. Those who have heard his voice through the resonance machines describe visions of endless darkness, a throne of gold covered in rust and bone, rivers of blood flowing upward into the stars. They see faces merging into one, thousands of souls screaming from a single mouth. Some claim to have seen him open his eyes, only to find that behind them lies not light, but the void itself. And then, they die. Every single one of them. The Mechanicus cannot stop. They are bound by curiosity, by the same disease that doomed me. They call it research, I call it worship through madness. The Emperor's body may be bound to the golden throne, but his mind stretches across the warp, echoing through the nightmares of every psyker, every servant, every believer who dares to dream. His consciousness has become the warp's mirror, a reflection of everything humanity has ever feared. The priests still kneel before their god. The adepts still repair his machine. The people still pray. But none of them realize that the voice they pray to may not be the emperor at all. Because something else might be answering back. And if that's true, if what sits upon the golden throne is no longer the emperor but something wearing his mind like a mask, then the Imperium has already fallen, it just hasn't realized it yet. For 10,000 years, the emperor's body has decayed upon the golden throne, but his spirit, his essence, has been drifting deeper into the warp. And the longer he remains trapped between life and death, the more he changes. You see, the warp does not understand the difference between gods and men. It only feeds on emotion, belief, fear, hope, hate. Every prayer to the emperor, every cry for salvation, every whisper of faith offered to him echoes into the Imperium. And the warp listens. Over time, those echoes have taken form. The emperor's psychic shadow has become something vast, a storm of faith and suffering so immense it rivals the chaos gods themselves. The ecclesiarchy calls it his divine presence. The Inquisition calls it the Astronomicon. But the Mechanicus, they call it the becoming. They believe that the emperor is not dying. He is evolving. I didn't understand it at first. The files I found were written in riddles and binary prayers, their meaning buried beneath blasphemous code. But once decrypted, the truth was undeniable. The warp is reshaping him, not out of corruption, but out of worship. The emperor's image, sustained by the belief of trillions, is becoming its own entity, independent from the dying husk on Terra. In other words, humanity's faith is building a new god in the warp. But this god is not the emperor. It carries his name, his light, his promise, yet it is something else entirely. Something made of human worship, not human will. A reflection of the emperor's ideals, stripped of his humanity. Pure, emotionless divinity. Imagine it, an entity formed entirely from the collective faith of the Imperium. To those who pray, it feels divine. To those who see it through the warp, it looks like a storm of gold and fire, vast enough to eclipse stars. But beneath that light, there is no thought, no mercy, only hunger, the same word the Mechanicus machines heard when they tried to speak to him. Hunger, not for flesh, nor blood, but for belief, for worship, for souls, because if the faith of humanity ever falters, this being will fade. It requires devotion to survive. Every prayer strengthens it, every doubt weakens it. The Imperium must believe, not because faith brings salvation, but because faith keeps their God alive. And so the truth becomes clear, the Emperor's divine form in the warp is not a savior. It's a parasite, a creation of desperation and belief, feeding endlessly on human faith. Meanwhile, the corpse on the golden throne continues to rot, its spirit long gone, its mind half devoured by the echoes of those who die in his name. Humanity thinks it prays to the Emperor, but it prays to his echo. His shadow, his ghost, and that ghost is growing stronger. If it ever fully awakens, if the warp-born version of the Emperor takes form, then humanity will face a god not of flesh, not of wisdom, but of pure faith. A being shaped entirely by what humans believe him to be. And tell me, what happens when faith turns to fear? When the prayers of billions become cries of terror instead of hope? Then the God they created will change again. Faith will feed it, fear will twist it, and the Emperor reborn will no longer be the protector of mankind, but its executioner. The day that happens will not mark the fall of the Imperium. It will mark its judgment. And that judgment is already stirring in the warp. For centuries, the ecclesiarchy has preached that the Emperor is mankind's savior. But within the shadows of cathedrals and shrines, behind locked doors and whispered prayers, there are those who speak a different truth. A truth too dangerous to utter aloud. They call themselves the cult of the living light. To the untrained eye, they look like any other sect of the imperial creed, priests, pilgrims, soldiers, all devoted to the worship of the Emperor. But their prayers are different. They do not speak of his suffering upon the throne. They speak of his awakening. Their doctrine is simple, yet terrifying. The throne is not his tomb, but his cocoon. They believe that the Emperor's decaying form is shedding its mortality, that every soul fed into the throne is fuel for his rebirth. They preach that one day soon, he will emerge from the warp not as man, not even as the Emperor, but as something greater. And they are not entirely wrong. I first heard of them through intercepted Vox transmissions, fragments of hymns and coded sermons spreading from Terra to the outer worlds. Their words carried the same phrase repeated endlessly: the light stirs. The God awakens. Prepare the flesh. At first, I dismissed it as another fringe heresy. The Imperium breeds madness faster than it breeds stars. But when I began tracing the origins of these messages, I found something chilling. They were being transmitted from within the Shola Progenium, the training academies of the Imperium's most loyal servants. Commissars, inquisitors, ecclesiarchs. The cult of the living light wasn't hiding in the shadows. It was embedded within the very heart of imperial faith. And the deeper I dug, the clearer their influence became. They had infiltrated the upper echelons of the Adeptus Ministorum, twisting doctrine from within. They'd altered liturgies, changing words of reverence into invocations of transformation. Even the daily prayers of the common worker now contain hidden codes, phrases meant to channel psychic belief directly into the warp-born image of the Emperor. Every prayer, every hymn, every act of devotion, it all feeds the becoming. The cult's leaders speak of visions, dreams where the Emperor's golden body splits open, revealing a being of fire and wings, vast enough to blot out suns. They claim he speaks to them through the warp, promising ascension, glory, and unity under his new form. But these promises carry a shadow. Because each time one of them receives a vision, another psyker dies screaming. Another world loses its silence to the sound of whispers bleeding through reality.
I used to believe the warp was boundless, infinite, beyond comprehension. But I was wrong. The warp is not infinite, it is contained. A closed loop of thought and emotion held together by consciousness. And the Emperor's consciousness is expanding beyond it. It began as a flicker, then a pulse, then a surge so vast that even the fabric of space groaned beneath its weight. Astropaths across the Imperium began screaming in unison. Ships navigating the warp found themselves in corridors of gold, walls of light bending around them like veins of a living being. The navigators called it the Veil of Becoming. Then, slowly, the stars themselves began to change. Their light shifted hue, burning not with plasma or fusion, but with psychic fire, golden, pulsing, rhythmic. The Emperor's psychic field had begun to bleed into the materium, fusing the warp and real space together. The galaxy itself was becoming his body. On Terra, time faltered. Days bled into each other. The sun no longer rose, it simply was. The sky shimmered as though reality were made of glass, bending under pressure. The throne world became the nexus of existence, the eye of the storm where thought and matter blurred. I remember walking through the halls of the Imperial Palace during those days. Servitors froze mid-motion. Vox units whispered prayers in languages no one had programmed. The marble floors vibrated like a heartbeat. And then, the voices came. They weren't hallucinations. They weren't demons. They were echoes, fragments of human thought drawn into the Emperor's expanding consciousness. The souls of the faithful, the damned, the forgotten, all merging into one vast mind. Inquisitors, custodians, citizens, all began to feel it, a growing awareness pressing against the walls of their minds, whispering words they couldn't refuse. We are one. The Emperor's rebirth was no longer metaphorical. It was happening, physically, metaphysically, psychically. He was merging with the warp, absorbing its chaos, erasing its gods, and folding it back into reality. And in doing so, he was breaking the boundaries between what is real and what is believed. Planets began to shift, terraforming themselves into visions of perfection based on human faith. Entire systems rearranged in geometric harmony. The warp storms that once raged across the galaxy now formed halos of gold. But for every world that glowed with divine order, another crumbled into dust, unable to withstand the new laws of being. Reality was rewriting itself, a new universe growing inside the old. And the Inquisition, my brothers and sisters, finally understood what we were witnessing. The Emperor was not ascending to godhood. He was consuming existence. In his new state, he could no longer distinguish between life and death, matter and mind, faith and fact. All things were becoming one, and in that unity, individuality ceased to matter. The Adeptus Mechanicus called it universal synthesis. The Ecclesiarchy called it divine harmony. But I called it what it truly was, the end. The end of will, the end of sin, the end of thought itself. A perfect, Eternal silence, where only one consciousness remains, the Emperor's. Perhaps this was always his goal. A galaxy without chaos, without disobedience, without choice. And perhaps that's what true peace really is, the end of everything that could ever resist him. Because if there is no one left to fall, then there can be no corruption. The Astronomicon now blazes like a second sun, brighter than ever before. But its light is not a guide, it is a signal. The Emperor is no longer reaching out to the stars. He is pulling them in. And soon, the galaxy will fold into his will entirely, a perfect creation of light and silence, without beginning or end. It is a cruel question, one that gnaws at the mind when the stars themselves begin to fade. The closer the Emperor came to perfection, the more I felt the universe grow still. Not calm, still, like a held breath stretched across a trillion dying worlds. The Mechanicus stopped their chanting first. Their machines no longer needed instruction, every cog turned without command, every engine thrummed in perfect rhythm with the Astronomicon's pulse. Then the choirs fell silent. The psychers had nothing left to transmit because every thought was already known. I remained awake longer than most, hiding within a bunker carved beneath the palace. The walls hummed with gold light, seeping through cracks like veins of living metal. I spoke into my recorder though I knew no one could hear. Perhaps I simply needed to feel the illusion of separation a little longer. Above me, the throne had changed. It was no longer a seat, it was a cocoon of burning thought, a chrysalis of will. The Emperor's body had long since ceased to exist. In its place hung a sphere of liquid light, rippling like a heartbeat made of suns. I saw faces in that light, millions of them, soldiers, pilgrims, children, saints. All smiling, all whispering the same word. Peace. They were not dead, they were joined, folded into his consciousness, each mind a note in a single endless hymn. And as the last resistance of matter dissolved, even the warp itself obeyed. The screaming tides of chaos quieted into smooth, glass-like stillness. The four great powers, wrath, decay, desire, and change, were drawn into him like sparks returning to a flame. For the briefest moment, I felt their terror. The gods themselves feared extinction. Then they were gone. I should have felt awe. Instead, I felt absence. No air, no time, no distance, only awareness, vast and indifferent. I tried to recall my own name and found nothing but warmth. The Emperor's voice came then, gentle as dawn. Rest. You are home. And for a heartbeat, I believed him. The pain faded. My memories slipped away one by one. Terra, the Inquisition, the wars, the screams. Everything melted into light. It would have been easy to surrender completely. But a single thought remained, tiny and sharp as a blade. If all is one, who watches? That question burned through the calm like fire through paper. The light around me flickered. For the first time, I sensed hesitation in the infinite. The Emperor's presence turned toward me, curious, almost, afraid. And in that hesitation, I saw truth. He had done it. He had ended pain, war, corruption. But he had also ended wonder, choice, and love. The galaxy was perfect because nothing within it could ever change again. Eternity without movement, salvation without freedom, and so I whispered the last heresy in creation. My Lord, you have become everything, except alive. The light shuddered. A crack ran through the gold. Through that crack, darkness bled, not chaos, not evil, but possibility. A spark of imperfection returning to the void. It grew, tiny at first, then bright as a newborn star. Perhaps it was my thought. Perhaps it was humanity's final rebellion, the refusal to be consumed entirely. The light and the dark spiraled together, forming something new. Balance, choice, life, and then, silence. When I opened my eyes again, I was alone. The palace was gone. The stars were different, young, blue, unmarked. I do not know where I am. Perhaps this is a new galaxy. Perhaps this is the beginning again. I only know that somewhere, deep within the fabric of this reborn universe, a golden echo watches. Waiting. Maybe he will learn. Maybe we all will. That's what this feels like. The world I awoke into was not the Imperium I knew, nor the universe I remembered. There were no banners of the Aquila, no sermons of the ecclesiarchy echoing through cathedrals of stone and gold. The stars above me burned clean and white, unscarred by warp storms. Space was silent, too silent. Perfect. At first, I thought I had survived. That somehow, by defying the Emperor's unending light, I had escaped into a new realm, untouched by his will. But soon, I began to realize something far worse. I hadn't escaped him at all. Everywhere I went, I saw traces of him. Not statues or monuments, but harmony. The air moved in symmetrical gusts. The rivers carved identical patterns in the soil. Every living thing grew according to a flawless geometry, repeating endlessly, without deviation or decay. A world without suffering, and without surprise. When I spoke to the people, they smiled. They spoke softly, kindly, perfectly. Their eyes were bright, but empty, like glass reflecting a sun they could not see. I asked them where they came from, and they all gave the same answer. We were always here. No one remembered a beginning. No one remembered a past. There were no stories, no dreams, no fear. Only peace. At night, I would look at the sky and see the faint shimmer of a vast golden halo encircling the horizon. It pulsed with thought, and I could feel it watching, an endless mind stretching across galaxies, whispering lullabies to every atom of existence. The Emperor's work was complete. He had created paradise. But paradise, I learned, has no room for questions. When I asked too many, the people grew silent. When I spoke of the Imperium, of Terra, of the Golden Throne, they smiled and said, "There is no need for such stories." And then, they forgot I had spoken. Even my memories began to blur. The years of war, the agony of the war, the face of my mother, all slipping away like ink in water. Only the question remained, if everything is perfect, why do I still feel fear? One night, as I wandered beyond the edge of the city, I came upon a mirror, standing alone in the desert, tall as a cathedral. Its surface shimmered not with reflection, but with gold light. And within that light, I saw him. Not the emperor as he was on the throne, nor the radiant god he had become. But a man, tired, ancient, burdened. His eyes were kind, but they trembled with doubt. He spoke, and the world around me stilled. Do you see what I have given them? Peace, unity, the end of pain. What more could you desire? I answered with a whisper. Choice. The light flickered. For the first time, I saw cracks forming across the horizon. The perfect geometry trembled. The rivers stopped flowing in sync. Somewhere, someone cried out in confusion. The emperor's gaze faltered, not in anger, but sorrow. I freed them from chaos. I gave them eternity, and in doing so, I said, you took away what made them human. The silence that followed felt endless. Then the mirror rippled, and I felt myself being pulled inside. The golden light flooded my veins, my mind, my soul. I felt everything he felt, the love, the pain, the loneliness of 10,000 years upon that throne. His will was not cruel. It was desperate. He did not want dominion. He wanted rest. But perfection has no rest. It demands itself endlessly. I broke free, gasping in the sand, and the mirror was gone. Only the echo of his voice remained, carried on the wind. If you would undo what I have made, then remember what it cost to build it. I understood then. The galaxy was not truly reborn, it was suspended. A dream, a golden dream held together by his will alone. And somewhere, deep beneath its luminous surface, the true universe still waited, asleep. Waiting for someone to wake it. That's how the golden world feels now. Every morning, the sun rises at the exact same angle. Every breeze carries the same scent of warmth and peace. Every laugh echoes at the same pitch. The perfection is maddening, and I am the only one who seems to notice. At first, I tried to blend in, walk among the people, smile when they smiled, pretend that everything was right. But inside, a tremor grew. A vibration deep in my skull, as if something within me was pushing against the stillness, begging to be let out. Then, one night, as I stood in the square where the mirror once stood, I whispered a single word into the silence. Why? The world froze. Every person in the plaza turned to me in unison. Their faces blank, their eyes, empty and brilliant, glowing faintly gold. Then, one by one, they began to speak in the same voice. There is no why, there is only peace. Their tone was gentle, melodic, perfect. But beneath it, I could feel something else, tension. Fear. The kind of fear a machine feels when it begins to realize it can break. I shouted louder this time, forcing the word from my throat like a weapon. Why? The sky cracked. Just a hairline fracture at first, a shimmer of violet in the endless gold. Then another, and another. The perfect symmetry of the city began to twist, bending under invisible strain. The air hummed like a string pulled too tight. People fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Not in pain, confusion. They were remembering. Faces they'd never seen, wars they'd never fought, love they'd never known. The floodgates of humanity had opened. And through them, the warp screamed. For the first time since perfection began, the chaos returned, not as monstrous gods, but as whispers. Possibility, emotion, choice, the elements of being human. The Emperor's dream trembled. His voice echoed across the heavens, calm yet desperate. Stop. You will undo everything. I looked to the sky, to that endless golden halo, and answered. Everything should be undone. The cracks widened. The sun shattered into 1,000 motes of burning light. The rivers reversed their flow. The people screamed, not in terror, but in joy, as their individuality returned like breath after drowning. But it came at a price. The golden light bled into the warp. The balance broke. The Emperor's perfection began to unravel, and with it, the fabric of reality. The world twisted upon itself, light and dark merging, the dream collapsing inward. Yet through it all, I felt something else. A pulse, a heartbeat, not his, ours, humanity's. For the first time in eternity, the galaxy was alive again. As the ground split open and the sky folded into flame, I saw him, towering above the crumbling horizon, vast and sorrowful. The Emperor, no longer radiant, but weary, ancient, and infinitely human. He looked upon me not as a god, but as a father looking upon a child who has finally learned to stand. You've brought back the chaos. No, I whispered, I've brought back the choice. He smiled, a sad, knowing smile that carried the weight of 1,000 ages. Then, he began to fade, dissolving into the same golden dust from which the world was made. Then my work is done, he said. And with those words, the illusion shattered completely. The light fell away, the cities vanished, the stars burned new and wild across a dark, unbound sky. The galaxy had been reborn, not perfect, not peaceful, but free. I stood alone on a barren world beneath a sky filled with unfamiliar constellations. Somewhere, deep within the void, I felt his presence still, quiet, distant, watching. Not as ruler, not as God, but as memory. Perhaps even as hope. Maybe this time, we will do better. Maybe this time, the dream will be ours. That's what I keep asking myself. Because no matter how far I travel, no matter how many light years stretch between worlds, I still hear him. Not in words, not in commands, just presence. A faint hum in the void. A whisper in the static between stars. The ghost of divinity that refuses to die. After the shattering of the golden dream, the galaxy was reborn in chaos, but not the chaos of demons or madness. This was the chaos of life itself, unpredictable, creative, wild. New civilizations began to rise amid the ruins of forgotten empires. Species once crushed beneath the Imperium's heel now breathed again. But across all of them, I sensed the same faint rhythm, a pulse that wasn't theirs. They built temples without knowing why. They told stories of a light that watched over them, not demanding worship, only remembrance. They called it by different names, the first fire, the silent king, the dreaming star, but I knew. It was him. The Emperor had not vanished. He had scattered, fragments of thought drifting through the warp, embedding themselves in newborn minds, flickering like sparks within the infinite dark. Each fragment carried a piece of what he had been: mercy, wisdom, ambition, fear. Together, they sang the quiet hymn of his memory, and somehow, I could hear it more clearly than anyone else. At first, I thought it was madness. I wanted it to be madness. Because if he still existed, if even a part of him endured, then the cycle had not ended. The same story that had played out 1,000 times before would begin again. Perfection, rebellion, ruin, rebirth. Endless, unstoppable. I began to record the whispers that came in my sleep. At first, they were scattered. Fragments of a voice, fire, light, humanity. But over time, they began to form words, sentences. Then, one night, I heard his voice clearly for the first time since the end. Do you see what I've done? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The sheer force of his presence pressed against my thoughts like a tide. I gave them freedom, he said, almost to himself. Now let us see what they do with it. And then, silence. The stars around me flickered, and I realized what he had done. The Emperor had not just dissolved into the warp, he had become it. The Imperium was no longer a realm of horror and corruption, but a canvas of potential. Every thought, every emotion, every act of creation now shaped it. Humanity was no longer the servant of a god, it was the god. Each mind a spark of the Emperor's consciousness, carrying forward the memory of what was and the hope of what might be. For the first time, I felt no fear, only understanding. The Emperor had not sought to rule eternity, He had sought to teach it. His final act was not conquest, it was release. He had become the whisper that drives us to wonder, the thought that questions authority, the spark that ignites rebellion. He was not the throne anymore. He was the echo of it. And so, I continued to wander. From world to world, from silence to silence, recording the traces of his dream as they flickered through the void. Sometimes I think I see him, in the eyes of a child who refuses to kneel, in the fire of a poet who dares to speak, in the engineer who builds something no one thought possible. He is there, in all of them, in all of us, and maybe that is the truest form he could ever take, not a god of gold and fire, not a corpse on a throne, but a whisper shared among billions. Be more. The cycle will continue, yes. But this time, it belongs to us. And if he still watches, perhaps he finally smiles, not as a ruler, but as a father who has finally let go. That is how this new age begins, not with thunder, not with war, but with light. A soft, crimson glow stretching across the ruins of what once was, warming the bones of a galaxy that had slept too long. They call it the new age of fire. Not because of conquest, but because of awakening. Fires no longer burn to destroy, they burn to illuminate. It has been decades since the golden dream shattered. The universe has mended itself in ways none could have predicted. The warp and real space have begun to intertwine in harmony, not opposition. Planets once lost to madness now bloom with life. The veil between thought and matter has thinned, imagination itself has become creation. Humanity, scattered and scarred, now rises again. But it is not the Imperium reborn. There are no more High Lords, no ecclesiarchy, no Inquisition. The old systems have crumbled to dust, their ashes scattered in the stellar winds. In their place stands something smaller, humbler, and perhaps, wiser. Communities of free worlds bound not by decree, but by choice. They trade, they argue, they dream. And within those dreams, the echo of his will still lingers. I travel between these worlds, recording what I see. I am no longer an inquisitor, the title means nothing now. I am simply a witness. A chronicler of what humanity has become. On a world once scorched by exterminatus, I saw children playing in fields of blue grass, laughing at the sight of fire.